Hello everyone, Silent K here with more cards to review. They've also announced the release date for the new expansion. It will be September 29th, so a couple weeks from now, maybe a week and a half by the time this video goes up. Alright, they dropped like 20 cards at once, so this video might take a while. We'll be going in order of class, with neutrals last. So first up is Vania for Bloodcraft. Vania, Vampire Princess, 2/2 for 2. With the ability of, whenever an allied forest bat comes into play, deal 1 damage to the enemy leader. She also summons a forest bat when she evolves, so right off the bat she's slightly above power curve. She evolves to get +3/+3 basically, plus she'll deal 1 damage for the forest bat that she summons. You don't typically evolve your 2-drops, so that's not really that big of a deal, but in a forest bat deck, this should be pretty good. You can play it on 2, hoping to Night Horde or something the next turn, or you can play it later in the game as a combo card, deal multiple damage, combo it with Queen Vampire to deal 2 damage. So it's a pretty good card. The verdict is, it definitely has a home in Forest Bat decks. Next up we have Bloody Mary, 4/5 for 5. During your turn, deal any damage dealt to your leader to the enemy leader instead. I was kind of back and forth with this card, because at 5 mana she has to compete with the dreaded Eriness, and if you combo her with a couple cards turn 9, like that late in the game, she has to compete with Temptress, which is just straight up damage, which is easier than playing combos. But thinking about it, she does have a lot of flexibility in between the 5 mana point and the 9 mana point. Like you could play Blood Wolf or Razory Claw for 7 mana total and deal 2 damage to the enemy leader instead of yourself. Typically Blood wants to deal damage to themselves, but in the later part of the game you might be trying to rush your opponent down. Obviously the dream combo is turn 8, you play Bloody Mary and you play Dire Bond. You deal 6 to the opponent, and you have an amulet that gives you cards and health every turn for 3 turns. So that flexibility around like 7 or 8 mana makes her pretty decent. For the verdict, I'm gonna just say she's a good card. Not really overwhelmingly special or anything, but definitely playable. If you do pull off the Dire Bond combo though, it's going to be pretty awesome. I'm pretty sure that's going to make a lot of people sour. Next up, Vampiric Fortress. A 2 mana amulet. At the end of your turn, summon a forest bat if an allied forest bat is in play. If there are 5 cards in your area, destroy the amulet and deal X damage. X equals the number of allied forest bats in play. So we got another card for Bat Blood decks, and this one's not bad. For 2 mana you only need to summon 2 bats for it to get value, and since it's an amulet, most people aren't going to have removal for it, and even if they do, maybe they don't want to waste it on Vampiric Fortress, they'd probably save it for Dire Bond. And with it being at the end of your turn, you can always just play this amulet, and then anytime in the future you play a bat card, you're going to get 1 free bat, so it's pretty good. There's also the potential combo with Queen Vampire. I'm not sure the order of operations with the amulet, but if you play this plus Queen Vampire, you will have an amulet, Queen Vampire, 2 bats, Vampiric Fortress will summon a bat, and then you will have 5 cards in the area, which could deal 3 damage immediately. I'm not sure if it would trigger that way, or if you'd have to wait another turn, but it's a possibility. The verdict for this one, this should be another good card for bat decks. Moving on to Dragoncraft, we have Neptune. A 5/5 for 7 with Ward, and Fanfare, summon a Megalorca. Megalorca being a 2 mana 2/2 token, and when you evolve Neptune, you actually evolve the Mechalorca as well, and the Mechalorca gets +2/+2 while the Neptune stays a 5/5. So you have 2 minions with Minion Storm, which allows you to divide up damage however you see fit, which is a little more useful than just evolving 1 big minion. As for its usefulness, it does have to compete with Shenlong and Dread Dragon at the 7 mana point, but the Dread Dragon and Shenlong have quite different uses, once for drawing cards and once for dealing direct damage, even without an evolve, so they all have their different uses, they could all see play in different decks. So the verdict is, it's a good card, and it will probably see play in certain decks. Next up, Noxious Dragon, a 4/3 for 4. Whenever you discard a card from your hand, deal 1 damage to all other followers. Now, the 4 mana point is pretty important in Shadowverse, being that it's usually the first turn you can evolve. If not, you hold on to your 4 until turn 5 and still evolve it, because even at 5 mana, your 4 mana evolves are usually good enough. This, however, doesn't have any special effect when evolved. It has poor stat distribution, it damages your own stuff when it procs, and you have to have some sort of discard engine set up. So some people have been talking about discard decks, and maybe that'll be a thing. I'm not really seeing how it would be useful, especially since a lot of the Dragoncraft discarding, you can't really burst all at once. Like you have the 1/2 minion that when you attack you discard a card. You have Shenlong that discards when you play him. And of course there's Golden Dragon's Den, which discards at the end of your turn, but sometime like this sort of setup you would want to be able to discard at will, like maybe play 2 or 3 things in order to wipe the opponent's board of 3 health minions. But this is kind of a clunky engine. I don't really see it being effective, so I can't see this one seeing any play. I mean, some people might experiment with it, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it's too clunky unless Dragoncraft gets more like useful discards that you can play at will. If that happens, maybe we'll see a discard deck, but as of right now, I don't think so. Next up, Elf Knight Cynthia for Forestcraft. 6 mana 5/6. Whenever another allied follower attacks, give it +1/+0. And when you evolve, you summon 2 fairies. So this is the first 6 mana evolve for Forestcraft. And it's got pretty decent stats. You only gain +1/+1 on the main card, but you do summon 2 fairy tokens, which is +3/+3 altogether. Typically you want fairies in your hand so you can enable combos, but just having extra tokens on the board is good. Whenever another allied follower attacks, give it +1/+0, which means you can just play this when you have another minion ready to attack, and it will get +1/+0 immediately. So a very useful card all around. The only problem with evaluating Forestcraft decks is that there are really only 2 Forestcraft decks right now, and that's the Path to Purgatory and Combo, which you don't really see as much. Combo is like cheap minions you play very fast. It's basically like Path to Purgatory without the Path to Purgatory. So these more expensive Forestcraft cards that don't really enable combo is questionable as to whether someone's going to build a deck around it. But just judging it on its own merits, I'm going to have to give it a verdict of good card. Next up, we have another expensive card for Forestcraft. Vault, King of the Elves, 5/5 for 7. Fanfare, put 2 fairies into your hand and change their cost to 0. This is basically the Fanfare version of Elven Princess Mage, but statted a bit more poorly. You do get 7/7 in stats if you play the free fairies right away, but typically you want to save them for combo enabling. The main problem though is that if it's turn 7 and you're still looking for cards to enable combos, your deck is probably doing something very, very wrong. As of right now, the verdict is not worth it. Maybe that changes in the future, but as of right now, I don't see it being useful. On the Havencraft, we have Elena's Prayer, a 3 mana amulet. Whenever your leader's defense is restored, give +1/+1 to all allied followers. So this is another card that requires multiple conditions. You have to have a healing card in your hand, you have to have minions on the board, and presumably you want to actually use the healing from the healing card in your hand, otherwise it's just going to go to waste. And this is an amulet, which means it takes up space on the board, which Havencraft has a lot of countdown amulets. Their board gets full very quickly, and the question is, do you want this on your board or do you want another countdown amulet? Because a lot of times you have multiple amulets with multiple countdowns, you have to prepare for future turns. So if you have a permanent amulet on your board, it's got to be super useful, like Guardian Sun. Then there's the case of healing. There's not very much good healing in the game right now. Havencraft runs Curate usually, and sometimes Healing Prayer. But other than that, there's not really anything super useful as far as healing goes. So as of right now, I'm going to have to say the verdict is not good enough. Maybe when there's a lot of good healing cards in the game, you could make some sort of heal deck, but I don't see that happening right now. Next up, Sledgehammer Exorcist, 3 mana 2/3. Evolve, destroy an enemy follower. This is kind of an awkward card. You typically don't evolve your 3 drops, so you'd have to save this until after turn 4 or 5. it gets +0/+0 when you do evolve it, so you only destroy one minion and then maybe trade into something else. But the main issue is that this is Havencraft we're talking about, who have some of the best removal in the game, including Priest of the Cudgel, another evolved minion, Blackened Scripture, Acolyte's Light, Demis's Decree. So compared to Havencraft's other removal, it's not as good, unless maybe you're trying to put together a concede deck where you just remove minions over and over again and annoy your opponent into conceding. But other than that, the verdict's not great, but might see play in specific decks like a concede deck. On to Runecraft, we have Sun Oracle Pascal. 5 mana 4/5, Earthright. At the end of this turn, double all other allied followers' attack and defense. Now this is a pretty powerful effect if you have an Earth Sigil on the board and some minions. And Earthright Path to Purgatory Rune usually can keep a board at some point in the game, since they play so many Guardian Golems. So it seems good, but I'm not really familiar with Runecraft all that well. It's my least played class. I probably played it less than 5 times on ladder, so as far as the decks go, I'm not really familiar enough with the specific decks to know whether it can fit in or not. So I'm just gonna have to give it a verdict of seems good, ? It seems good from a straight value standpoint, but I'm not an expert on Runecraft decks. Next up we have Remy and Rami, Witchy Duo, 4 mana 3/4. When you evolve it, if you have an Earthright, summon a Guardian Golem. Now the most important question about this card is, where the hell did Rami go in the evolved version? I know the slide in this video is kind of small, but in the normal version you can see Remy in the foreground and Rami is in the background, teeny tiny in the upper right hand corner. You should look at the, actually I'll put up the full size version during editing. In the evolved version though, she's gone. Just gone. I don't know where she went. Oh, anyway, about the card. Now this is a Runecraft evolve card. I know that's shocking. As of right now, the only evolve card Rune runs is Merlin in spell boost decks, and that's also a 4-cost card, so this is competing with the only other evolve card. But this is for Earthright, not for spell boost, so they have 2 different decks. The other thing to note about this card is that it only expends an Earth Sigil after you evolve it, so it's the only card so far that consumes an Earth Sigil after it's placed on the board. So you could conceivably play this, and then if it survives the next turn you could drop an Earth Sigil and then evolve it for the effect, which is kind of interesting. It's probably not something you'll ever count on, but it's there. The other thing to note is that this gets +2/+2 and summons a Guardian Golem, which is a 2/3, so this gets an evolved total of +4/+5, which is huge. Plus if you're playing a Path to Purgatory deck, that's an extra token for 1 more shadow. So again, I'm no expert on Runecraft, in fact I'm the complete opposite, but from a pure value standpoint, the verdict has to be, seems good, ? And finally, Witch Bolt. 3 mana, deal 4 damage to an enemy follower, draw a card if an evolved follower is in play. Now this is a new condition that's on a couple cards in the expansion, draw a card, not draw a card, if an evolved follower is in play. So it's one of those conditions you just never really thought of before. At 3 mana, you're probably not going to be combining this with the minion that you evolved the same turn, unless you save an evolve point for turn 7. It's a new condition though, so it's kind of hard to judge. Do you really remember how often you have an evolved minion on the board? Not usually, I think, because it's usually a high stat minion. Your opponent wants to get rid of it quickly. So my instinct is to say it's not a very good condition. It's not one you're going to be able to use very often. Witch Bolt also sits right in between Wind Blast and that other removal, 4 mana, deal 6, I think. Flame something or fire something. And since I'm no Runecraft expert, it's kind of hard to judge this one. I'm leaning toward not really good, just because it has an awkward condition and has a set amount of damage. It's not really as good as the other 2 cards that it sits in between. But like I said, I am the least familiar with Runecraft decks, so my verdict is just going to be seems not good, ? On to Shadowcraft, spell Rise of the Dead, 2 mana, randomly add 1 of your highest cost followers that has been destroyed during this match to your hand. Let me start off by saying I'm liking Shadow's new res mechanic. Getting back highest cost followers that have been destroyed is pretty useful compared to Hearthstone's Resurrect mechanic, which is just a random minion that died. So you could get like a 1/1 token when you really wanted one of your better cards. But this is basically just a 2-mana draw card. On the plus side, you do get a minion that you can definitely play. If your 4-drop just died, and that was the highest cost minion you played so far, then you're going to get back the 4-drop, which you already played, so you can obviously play again, putting aside Lord Atomy shenanigans. The downside is that if you just played a minion in the last turn on curve, then you're going to get that one back, which means you spent 2 mana on the card draw, and then you get back a minion that's 1 less than how much mana you started with, so you're not going to be able to play it that turn. There's also the consideration that Shadowcraft doesn't really have a problem drawing cards. You got Soul Conversion, which gives you 2, you have Skull Cradle Widow, which gives you 1, some people run Bellringer Angel for another 1. So do you really need 2 mana, draw 1 card, and you can only play the minion that you draw if you're at least 2 turns ahead of the last minion that died? I'm gonna say not likely. So the verdict is it's not terrible, but it's a very niche card. Unless you have some specific combo set up or some sort of theme deck, then you're probably not going to run this. Next, Death Chaser, 3 mana 2/3. Whenever another follower evolves, gain 2 shadows. The stats are okay, but the effect is kind of weird and unreliable. You either need to combo this when you're about to evolve a minion, or it needs to survive at least 1 turn, which isn't likely. And just to gain 2 shadows, that's not really all that helpful. So at 3 mana, there are definitely better cards to put in your deck. The verdict, not good enough. Unless you really need as many shadows as possible, you're probably not going to run this card. For Swordcraft, we start with White Paladin, 3 mana 3/2, Ward. You can evolve it to summon a Shield Guardian for each enemy follower in play, and a Shield Guardian is a 1/1 token with Ward. This card piqued my interest at first because it seems sort of like a cheaper Otohime that requires an evolve point. But first of all, it's a 3 mana minion, which means it's not going to fall on curve in the Evolve Wars, which is turn like 4 to 6. Second of all, this card really is only very good when your opponent has a big board, which as Swordcraft you don't want your opponent to have a bigger board than you because Swordcraft doesn't have a lot of board control options other than minion combat. This type of card would be good if you wanted to stall for a turn. You let them crash all their minions against your ward wall, and then you follow up with a big AoE to wipe their board. But Swordcraft doesn't have AoEs available, so all it does is really stall and allow your opponent to keep their board unless they have really crappy aggro minions with 1 health. So the verdict is this card is good in a vacuum. If you're thinking outside of Swordcraft, it would be a good control card maybe. But in a sword deck that doesn't have access to any good AoEs, you can't really play a control style, so it's not going to be good in a sword deck. Not right now anyway. If sword gets a good AoE or something, some better control tools, then maybe. But not right now. Next we have Koga Kunoichi. 7 mana 3/3 with Ambush, and Fanfare she summons a second Koga, so you get 2 3/3s with Ambush for 7 mana. And I'm just going to have to straight up say no. Because at 7 mana, every deck running AoE has access to AoE, so you're going to pay 7 mana and have both your tokens just wiped out immediately. That's not good. It's a slow card, so it can't do anything the turn it's played unless you evolve it. Basically, Ninja Master is a better card because he hits the board as a 4/4, which survives a lot of AoE, and then at that point you can evolve him or buff him or do whatever you want. But 2 turns later for 2 minions that have lower health and can die to AoE is just not worth it. As a minor positive though, if your Koga gets homecominged, then you get 2 Kogas in your hand, which turns into 4 Kogas. So if you're seeing nothing but Forestcraft running homecoming on the ladder, then tech in your Kogas, because otherwise they're not going to be very useful. Verdict, nope. And for 2 mana we have the Fearless Banneret. It's a 2/1, whenever another follower evolves, summon a knight. Here we have another of the when a follower evolves conditions. So again, you're gonna either have to play this and then evolve a minion next turn after this survives, or you're gonna have to combo it, which basically all it does is add +1/+1 to any minion you evolve. but as a 2 mana you really expect a 2/2 at least, so really it's like a +1/+0 to any minion you evolve. I just don't see it working. Like for 6 mana you could play Floral Fencer plus Fearless, evolve the Fencer, and fill your board. Alternatively, you could just play Otohime. This isn't a good card on 2, it's not a great card to combo with an evolve. So the verdict is it's an awkward ability and it's overshadowed by more solid cards that are good on their own or comboed with other things. And finally onto the neutral cards. We have neutral legendary, Odin. He's an 8 mana 4/3, Fanfare Banish, any enemy follower or amulet. So this is an interesting one to evaluate. First of all, you get the combined effects of Execution and Acolyte's Light as a neutral card. You can banish any follower or amulet, as opposed to Acolyte's Light, which can only banish followers. And it also comes with a body. Not a particularly good body for 8 mana, but you're also getting what is potentially a 6 mana effect, so you're getting a 2 mana 4/3. The question is, can you wait 3 extra turns between 5 mana when you have access to Execution and Acolyte's Light, and 8 mana when you have access to Odin? Now we already have a similar card available in Shadowcraft called Pluto, which I do have and I have used before, and a lot of times when I was running Pluto I would really want access to removal before she was available. So even though it's a good looking card at first glance, you have to consider the speed of the meta and the style of deck you're playing. If your biggest concerns are threats that drop on or after turn 8, like Mordecai or Path to Purgatory, then you can get away with running Odin. But in a faster meta where you're really concerned about threats on turn 5 or 6 or 7, then you're not going to want to run this because the damage will already be done by the time you can play it. Also, speaking of Havencraft concede decks, wink wink, ultimately though the verdict is going to have to be that its usefulness will vary based on the meta and or deck. Sometimes it will be very good, sometimes it will be way too slow. You're going to have to tech it in when it's useful and tech it out when it's not. And finally, the last card, Unicorn Dancer Unica. 2 mana 2/2. At the start of your turn, restore 2 defense to your leader. Now you always have to be cautious about at the start of your turn effects, because chances are the minion is going to die before it ever gets its effect off. This can also be immediately compared to the 3 mana 2/3 that heals you for 2 as a Fanfare ability. I can't remember the name of it. But is it worth the 1 mana discount to lose 1 health and almost certainly lose the effect entirely? Probably not. With the 1 extra health, the other card will either trade into 2 aggro minions or 1 aggro minion that's been buffed, and it will heal you immediately. So for a 1 mana discount, you lose the 1 health, which trades into 1 aggro minion that's not even buffed, and you lose the heal. So I'm going to say in a heal-centric deck, or just as an anti-aggro card, it's not as useful. So the verdict is, ultimately this isn't a terrible card, but I just don't think it's good enough for what it intends to do. Although I wouldn't be surprised to see a few people playing with it on the ladder. And that's it for now. I know a lot more cards have been revealed through Japanese channels, though I like to wait until the Darkness Evolved website adds them so that I know that they're real, I know the official translations, and I have the graphics assets to work with. So when the website gets updated again, I'll make another video. I hope you all found this informative. Thanks for watching, have a good night, and tune in again next time.